Hey guys, what's up? This is Casio, and this will be my last video on progressive chess. I may do some later if you guys have questions or anything like that, or if I find anything new about opening theory, but this will be the last one. So I thought in this video I'd just talk a little bit about the history of the game, and then show some other variants, some of my efforts to kind of fix the game, and ways to make it more of a game and less of a puzzle. So this history is taken from an article in one of the Italian chess variant magazines, Ettore Scacco, and it's by Cassano and Forzoni. And they say that the first report on progressive chess was in April 1947, that Znasko Borowski went to a tournament in Scotland and then came back from it and gave a lecture about this new way of playing chess in his Lectures pour vous. And he said it was a new invention, more attractive than chess Marseillaise. Chess Marseillaise is when you get 2 moves per side, which also called double move chess, which isn't particularly exciting. So since he learned this somewhere in Scotland, by going to some tournament in Scotland, that's why we now call this Scottish progressive chess. The Italian progressive chess rules came about when Roberto Salvadori in 1971 introduced the rule that you couldn't end your series early with check. And this example that I gave, it turns out this was actually given as a problem, which is kind of amusing because I came up with this completely on my own. And then it's on the same webpage showing, illustrating the difference in the rules. I guess it's not that hard to think of this and realize the implications. But it's interesting to me that they argue that this is a strength, that this is checkmate in Italian progressive chess, is a strength of the game, and I just don't see it. I mean, I don't understand why one would consider that this makes the game stronger. I mean, you're adding a rule, right? It's like this pawn is not guarded. It should be able to be taken. The Scottish rules, to me, just make sense. I mean, if it were fixing a flaw in the Scottish rules, I would understand, but I don't see why it's a flaw. I like the fact that a ghost doesn't necessarily have to win. I like the fact that the ghost gets played out. It's kind of, to me, is more. It's more beautiful that they have to make the move and then deliver check, and then you win with the. So anyway, I've beaten that horse to death, so I won't keep talking about that. What else? And it was mentioned in so it looks like the game goes back to at least like the 1940s. That it was mentioned again by Joseph Boyer or Boyer, Les Jeux des Échecs Orthodoxes in Paris, 1951, and then mentioned again in 1969 in a book called A Guide to Fairy Chess by Anthony Dickens. So that's all the mentions of the rules there. So I think the first thing I wanted to mention is the main problem with progressive chess is that as soon as anybody knows any sort of theory on the game, it becomes very difficult to play, especially in correspondence. Like once I play d4 and you play c5 cd and I show a4 e4 e5, well, now I can't play c5 cd against you because you'll play a4 e4 e5 against me, and this is the problem you run into when it comes down to it. Progressive chess, even though you make you get your 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 moves, it's really only one move. The game only goes 5 moves really for either side, so that's not a lot of theory. I mean, you can imagine if chess only went 5 moves deep, you could conceivably analyze it then all the way to oblivion. And it's not quite that easy with progressive chess because there's a ton of possibilities for each move, way more than in regular chess. But in reality, it's more like there really aren't. There's really, like, if you say there's 50 moves in a position that are legal in regular chess, there's probably only about that in progressive chess, that don't get mated or just lose horribly to material, wins. So while you can't check everything, you probably could. It's really sort of like finding needles in a haystack. If you could find all those series that win a certain amount of material that then don't get mated, then you could establish the theory of the game, which is kind of what I've tried to do in the last 2 videos. But I still think the best way to actually play the game is Fischer random. While this doesn't solve the problem of the game that it's kind of this static static assessment for one side. One side's probably better, but as long as you're playing like giving people white and black in equal proportions, you could even play a 2-game match. Probably back to back would work better than consecutive, so that they can't mirror your moves. Then that should prove who's the better player. Because if white really has an advantage, then you'll win, and then you'll both win your games, and then it'll be even. So 2-game matches in Fischer Random is probably the way to go. And I'll talk a little bit about Fischer Random now. So like here, this was one of the setups from the Fischer Random Progressive Chess Championship that I played in, that ChessVariants.com organized in back in 1998. There hasn't been one since then. If you're wondering why I always refer back to games from years ago, but even here where the kings are kind of in the center still, the rooks are in a radically different place, and the bishops are different. And even though the setup is has a lot in common with the starting setup of regular chess, it still just leads to really interesting play. So, like for example, this is the game Hyatt against Alfred Pfeiffer of Germany. E4, E5, H5, and this is probably already a mistake, because white has this strong series: Knight H3, F4, F takes E5, and there's a lot of promotion threats, and the Knight H3 is guarded against black's various threats. B4, F4, Fe might be good too. So black tried a swarm try here, and people will try swarms all the time, and they usually don't work. But in this particular case, the idea was to get the king safe and then deliver a check and hope that this is sufficient to win. But white found a series that again, basically whether or not you can put your king on this square in front of your bishop like this and ask to be ghosted. Because really it just depends if you are getting ghosted. If you're not, and you're making some giant material grab, in this case ending on H4, was actually really good. And this was because he played H5 that this was possible. Notice if the pawn were still on H7, then it would be harder to eat this kind of material. You couldn't get to H7 in 2 moves. So this enabled a large munch, eating all the pieces. So black had this natural try: Knight F2, Knight takes H1, Rook H8, Rook takes H4. So he's eaten a queen and a rook, and he's ended his series of 5 pieces to 4. And white's king is still somewhat misplaced, so white has to come up with a really good series here. And I played this move: b4, c4, bishop c2, rook takes h1, g3, g takes h4, bishop f5 check. And this fixed white's problems with his king by just getting the bishop out and playing g3, g8. So I've created some pawns that are annoying threats, and this is a win. White has 5 pieces to 3, and he delivered check. And even though black has a rook, he has the same problem you see in a lot of series where you leave a side with the rook. That say he moves here, well, he can't get in on the d file, he can't get in on the h file. Well, he can, but he can't get through h2 to get the rook on h1. But maybe he would have some try where he can play like the b pawn, bishop takes h1, and then moves with the rook. So that's what he tried. He played king d6, b5. Bishop takes h1, which is probably a good. I don't know if the king wants to be on d6, but if that's best. And then he has 5 moves left. But the problem is he doesn't have much left to do with those 5 moves. He played c5, cb, rook takes c4, rook takes h4. But by now, if you've been at a5, but by now if you've been watching progressive chess, you know that this ending his series down 3 pieces to 4. No matter how many pawns he has, this isn't going to work. And in fact, this just got checkmated to knight c3, knight e7, knight f4, knight fg6, a3, ab to cover that square, and bishop takes e5. So this shows you some of the beauty of progressive chess, like of Fischer Random progressive chess. Like, there's no way you're ever going to see this kind of checkmate with all 4 minor pieces in regular progressive chess. They're going to be gone. They're going to be off the board. But you're going to see different piece configurations present on the board because it'll be harder to take some pieces and easier to take others. And so you see games like this, which you'll see new and cool checkmates. If you remember the game against Blachik where the king marched over to f7 to stop the G5, G6 pawn and and the rook from coming in on the f-file. You just would never see stuff like that in regular progressive chess. So I think Fischer Random is the way to go. It avoids the theory, and it keeps the game with the same rules, which are pretty good. But if you want to play with a starting setup, there are a few other things you can do. So I invented a variant that I call slow square progressive chess. So to play this, you would need a coin of some kind, a quarter or some coin, whatever. And the idea is that after each of your moves, you put the coin down on an empty square on the board, and moving through or into that square takes one additional move. So for example, if I played the move e4 and I didn't want black to play e5, I could put the coin on either e6 or e5, and now he could play it, but it would take him 2 moves to do so. Notice if a pawn moving 2 squares is 1 move, so if it moves through one of the slow squares, then it takes 2 moves to do that. So for example, then suppose he goes d5, d takes e4, and now he wants to stop this idea of queen g4, queen c8, queen d8. So he puts the coin on e2, and now, since he put the coin on e2, white cannot play queen g4, queen c8, queen d8. But of course he could play this series d3, d takes e4, queen takes d8. So a better spot for the coin might be d7. By putting the coin on d7, and your coin goes away after each the opponent will replace it. So in this case the opponent moves the slow square to d7, and now either d3, de4, or queen d8 would take 4 moves, and queen g4, queen c8, queen d8 would take 4 moves because you're going through the slow square on d7. So white would have to come up with a totally different idea here, but he could do something like this. Bishop c4, queen h5, queen takes f7 check, and then he could put the coin on d7, and by putting the coin on d7, the king would have to spend 2 of his 4 moves. 2 of his 4 moves just to go to d7. I'm debating in this game, when I made the rules, whether or not the king should actually. There's 2 pieces I wasn't sure about the rules working with the slow squares, and that's the king and the knight. So I debated making it where the king ignores slow squares, and I think that might be a good rule, because I think otherwise there's some annoying situations where you just deliver check and you make him have to take 2 moves to get out of check, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'll let you guys debate it. I haven't really tested this game out a lot. With the knight, I think the knight needs to be stopped by slow squares somehow. You can't just say he ignores them to get to where he's going. So the options here are to say the knight moves like so, that he moves 1 square and then 1 square diagonally. In this case, you could say that if the coin is here, he would spend an extra move to make his moves. The other option is to say he moves 2 squares over and 1 square up or down, so that a slow square in either of these squares, c4 or d4, if the knight's moving from b4 to d5 or b4 to d3, if there's a coin here on d4, he would be considered slow. I think. And then the other thing is whether or not you should be able to put the coin on squares that are occupied. I think just for gameplay, it's easier to say you have to put it on an empty square, and I think that's probably a better set of rules. But this is one idea. As you can see, it gives you a little more finer control over your opponent's series, and you have a way to kind of directly stop the things he's trying to do. So that's one interesting variant of progressive chess that's an attempt to, but it still may have a static assessment and theory. You may be able to work out theory on it. So I don't know if it's actually better than progressive chess or not, but anyway, I thought I'd mention that as an interesting variant. Another variant, which I think is a completely different game, but I'll mention it anyway, is one called English progressive chess. In English progressive chess, it works the same. White makes 1 move, black makes 2 moves, white makes 3 moves, and when you give a check, you end your series. En passant is not legal, and you have to get out of check on the first move like normal. But the difference is that you can't move a piece twice, unless you have moved every mobile piece that you can move at least once. So like a blocked pawn doesn't count. You don't have to move a blocked pawn because it can't move. But you can't, for example, play queen g4, queen c8, queen d8. And d5, de is illegal. Like he could go d5, e5, and now white cannot go queen g4, queen c8, queen d8 because he can only move the queen once, like to h5 or something. So here he could play like e takes d5, d4, and knight f3. And notice on knight f3 he doesn't have to worry about e4, ef because that pawn can't move twice, and he doesn't have to, it can't even be taken here. So this is just something interesting. Like bishop e4 check is interesting.